The morning sun spread across my backyard, pouring light over the tables I had dressed with checked cloths and balloons tied in clusters. The grill was set to one side, the cake inside waiting in its box, and the folding chairs lined up neatly under the shade. I had spent the last week making sure everything looked effortless, though nothing about it was effortless. Zinnia darted around the yard, her laughter as bright as the streamers I had strung between the fence posts. She wore the birthday crown she had insisted on, a cheap paper one from the dollar store that somehow made her look like royalty in her own court. She ran to me, tugging at my sleeve with the kind of urgency only an 8-year-old could summon. "Mom," she asked breathlessly, "do you think Grandma will like my bike?" I hesitated. The air seemed to still for a beat. Her little face, open and glowing, deserved only encouragement, not the shadow that question carried. I brushed her hair back gently and smiled. "Sweetheart, it's not about whether she likes it," I said softly. "It's about how much you love it. And you do, don't you?" Her grin widened, and she nodded with so much enthusiasm that I laughed. Still, her question lingered like a pebble in my shoe. Because when Zinnia said Grandma, she meant my mother-in-law, Astria. Every family has its black sheep, the saying goes, but mine just happened to come draped in pearls and judgment. By noon, neighbors and church friends had started to arrive, carrying casserole dishes and gift bags. The sound of children running in the grass mixed with the murmur of adults catching up about work, weather, and everything in between. I stood by the patio doors, watching it unfold, telling myself, this day has to stay about Zinnia. She deserves one perfect memory, untouched by old family games. Then came the entrance. Astria didn't walk so much as command space. She wore a tailored jacket, though the day was warm and her jewelry sparkled under the sun. Her voice carried over the crowd before I even saw her face. "Well, look at this turnout," she declared, spreading her arms as if she had personally summoned them all. "Of course, everyone loves a good family party when it's ours." She said ours, but not once glanced my way. People shifted toward her like she was the magnet in the room, and I felt that familiar pinch in my chest. Years of watching her draw light away from anyone else had trained me to expect it, but that didn't dull the sting. I forced a steady smile and greeted her, but she swept past, kissing cheeks and clasping hands, already in performance mode. She reached a circle of women by the table, and I moved closer with plates, just in time to hear her say, "This is Seline. She just organized the snacks." The words hung in the air, sharper than they had any right to be. Just snacks. I had been up late, stringing decorations, baking cupcakes, coordinating games, making sure every child had a party favor bag. My throat tightened, but I kept my smile. One of the women glanced at me, perhaps embarrassed by the slight, and said kindly, "It's beautiful, really. Everything looks wonderful." "Thank you," I replied, holding her gaze for a moment. That tiny bit of recognition mattered more than she probably knew. But Astria wasn't done. She patted the woman's arm and added with a proud tilt of her chin, "My son worked so hard to provide for all this. He makes sure his family has what it needs." The implication was clear. Whatever anyone saw here, the credit belonged to him. And by extension, to her, the mother who raised him. Not me. I set the plates down carefully, my hands steady though my chest burned. Inside, I thought, silence can be golden, but sometimes it's just rusted chains. Children squealed as they played tag near the swing set, their joy a sharp contrast to the undercurrent adults were too polite to name. I watched Zinnia climb onto her new bike, pedaling across the yard with ribbons flying from the handlebars. She was so proud, so radiant, and for a moment the noise around me faded. But when I lifted my eyes, I caught the way Astria was watching the bike. Not Zinnia, just the bike. Her eyes lingered there, sharp as glass, and a chill rippled through me despite the warmth of the afternoon. And that's when I saw her eyes land on the bike, sharp as glass, like it had no right to exist. The laughter of children floated across the yard, but beneath it I heard the sharper tone of my mother-in-law slicing through conversations. I was passing out slices of watermelon when her voice rose above the chatter, directed at a group of relatives near the picnic table. "Now that's a modest girl," she said, nodding toward her other granddaughter, who sat quietly with folded hands. Then she let her eyes flick in Zinnia's direction. "Not spoiled like some kids." A hush followed. People shifted. Glances darted from Zinnia's bike to me and back to Astria. A few gave tight smiles, others found sudden interest in their plates. My daughter, oblivious, pedaled in circles, streamers fluttering behind her. She laughed, radiant, as if no words could dull her joy. I wanted to snap back, to tell Astria to stop weaponizing comparisons, but Zinnia's smile kept me silent. My girl's happiness was intact, and I wasn't going to let her see it shattered. Inside, though, the sting pressed deep. Theodore Roosevelt's words whispered through me, "Comparison is the thief of joy." He was right, and in our family, joy never lasted long without someone stealing it. I turned to greet a neighbor instead, forcing my voice steady. "Thanks for coming. Did you find the place okay?" I asked, using small talk like a shield. But the damage was already done. Those who heard her remark had absorbed it, and so had I. Not long after, Astria raised her voice again, this time so the entire group could hear. "This party," she announced proudly, "is only possible because of my son. He works so hard for his family." The timing was calculated. Guests clapped politely, nodding in agreement. My smile froze. She hadn't mentioned me at all, not the late nights I had spent sewing tablecloths, or the double shifts I'd worked to afford decorations, or the nights I fell asleep over a stack of invitations I'd handwritten. My throat ached. Not a word about the overtime, not a word about the cake I baked after midnight, just my son, her son. One kind woman leaned toward me and whispered, "It's beautiful. I can tell how much effort you put in." "Thank you," I breathed, grateful for that sliver of recognition, but Astria caught it and cut in smoothly. "Seline decorates. Real effort comes from paying the bills." The words burned. My chest tightened, but I held my face still. Around us, conversations stuttered, then stumbled forward again. Inside, my thoughts hardened. So that's it. Just decoration. Just snacks. Invisible in my own home. Invisible at my own child's birthday. She wants me small. She wants me voiceless. I set down a tray with deliberate calm, even as my hands itched to throw it. Meanwhile, Thayer lingered near the grill, watching without speaking. His silence deepened the wound. If he wouldn't defend me, who would? Astria wandered the yard like a queen inspecting her estate, eyes scanning my banners and ribbons. She pinched one streamer between her fingers, then let it fall as though unimpressed. "She always does this, doesn't she?" A guest whispered nearby, not realizing I heard. I forced a polite smile, a nod, the kind that says, "Yes, I know. But what can I do?" What I could do was start promising myself change. My silence was no longer submission. It was the pause before action. She forgets I have more than silence. She forgets I know when appearances matter most, and here in Iowa, appearances mean everything. She humiliates me in front of guests because she knows I won't fight back. But she doesn't see what's coming. The afternoon light shifted, shadows lengthening across the yard. Children gathered for cake, while adults leaned into conversations heavy with subtext. I caught Astria again, her gaze flicking, not at me this time, but at Zinnia's shining bike parked near the fence. The metallic frame gleamed in the sun, bows still bright from the morning. Zinnia had placed it proudly by the patio, like a trophy of her joy. She stood near it, hands on her hips, chest puffed with pride, telling her cousin about the new bell on the handlebar. I watched Astria's expression, cold, measuring. I knew that look, the same one I'd seen when she dismantled every small joy I tried to build. Her lips curved slightly, not a smile, but the suggestion of one, the way people smile when they imagine an ending before it arrives. My chest tightened with a different kind of fear, not for myself, but for the innocence she was about to target. That bike isn't just a gift, it's freedom, it's pride, it's proof that my daughter can have something of her own without strings, and I could feel her plotting to ruin it. She took a step forward, deliberate and slow, while the laughter of my guests rang in the background, unaware. And then she moved toward the bike, her steps slow but certain, as if every laugh in the yard was already hers to silence. The laughter around the table quieted as gift bags were passed to the front. I had bought one of the larger presents for Zinnia, carefully choosing the wrapping with pastel balloons printed across it. It wasn't extravagant, but it was thoughtful. A journal and colored pencils, something that might spark her imagination as much as her bike inspired her energy. Before I could explain, Astria's voice rose above the chatter. She tapped the box, smiling like a queen distributing treasures. "This one's from me," she declared loudly. Polite clapping followed, and my stomach twisted. That was my gift. I had chosen it, bought it, wrapped it. But in front of everyone, she claimed it as hers without a blink. A cousin thanked her warmly. "That's so thoughtful, Astria. You always remember the kids." She dipped her chin, smug and serene. "Of course. I always think of the children." The heat crawled up my neck, but I forced my expression still. No one corrected her. No one looked to me. My gestures, my effort, even the small kindnesses stolen in plain sight. Inside, I seethed. She wants the spotlight so badly she doesn't mind lying in front of her own family. I busied myself cutting slices of cake, the knife heavy in my hand. My silence felt like acid, burning from the inside. Later, as the candles flickered down and children shouted over the frosting, Astria struck again. She lifted her fork, pausing dramatically. "In this family," she said loudly, "children don't get luxuries until they earn it." The chatter stuttered to a stop. Her eyes slid toward the shining bike propped proudly near the fence. The jab was obvious. I froze, knife still in my hand. "We raise workers here," she continued, voice sharp. "Not spoiled brats." A murmur ran through the guests, eyes darting from her to me, then back to Zinnia, who sat with pink icing on her cheek, unaware she was being shamed. I stared at Astria. Luxuries. An 8-year-old's bike. To her, even joy was something to punish. A phrase my father once told me rang in my ears. "Don't kick the ladder your children climb on." But Astria didn't just kick ladders, she tore them down. I gripped the knife harder, then set it down before my hands betrayed me. This wasn't the first time. Memories bled through as I sat stiff at the table. Years ago at Thanksgiving, I had brought my grandmother's sweet potato casserole, made from scratch. It was the first dish I'd ever cooked for the family. I carried it in proudly, placed it on the buffet, and watched as people praised its flavor. And then, with perfect timing, Astria said, "Oh, that's mine. It's always a hit." Nobody corrected her. Nobody asked. I laughed along, but inside, something snapped. There was the Christmas when I stayed up sewing stockings for every child. She passed them out the next morning, saying she had picked them up at the store. Or the baby shower when I handmade decorations, and she told the guests, "Seline just followed my directions." I used to tell myself it didn't matter. But when the same knife cuts you enough times, the scars begin to choke. The past pressed against the present, and for a moment I struggled to breathe. Then I looked at Zinnia. Her eyes sparkled as she leaned over to whisper a wish to her cousin, her joy unshaken. "This is why I endure," I reminded myself. But she's watching, and I won't let her learn silence from me. The yard filled again with chatter, but my mind spun. Astria's gaze never softened. She flicked it between me, the guests, and the bike. It wasn't about the children. Her rules weren't about discipline. They were for me, for showing I was small enough to break, even in front of my daughter. I knew the look. It was the same look I'd seen when she crushed every joy I had ever tried to hold on to, and this time she was ready to do it again. After Astria's pronouncement about family rules, the yard shifted into something heavier than the summer air. Conversations trailed off, cut short mid-sentence. Even the children seemed to sense the tension, their laughter dipping into quieter tones as if they, too, felt the weight pressing down. I smiled, though it felt more like a mask stretched across my face. The corners of my mouth trembled as I set another plate of cake on the table. No one said a word. Not a single guest spoke up against her remark. Two women standing near the lemonade table leaned toward each other, voices low. "She always takes over," one whispered. But no one ever says anything. They were right. And that silence hurt more than the insult itself. The worst pain isn't when people laugh at you, it's when they see you burning and still look away. I glanced around. Some guests sipped from their cups nervously, Others bent down to tie shoes or straighten napkins, anything to avoid making eye contact with me. A few fixed their gazes on the children playing tag across the lawn, pretending distraction. That's what life in a small town teaches you. Avoid conflict at all costs. Smile politely, don't rock the boat, even if someone drowns right beside you. And in that moment, I was the one going under. My eyes found Thayer by the grill. He stood there with arms crossed, a spatula in one hand, eyes locked on the hot dogs he hadn't turned. I needed him to look up, to say something, anything, but he didn't. Astria caught his stillness like a gift and used it against me. "See?" she said, her voice rising above the hum of the yard. "Even Thayer knows this is how our family works." A ripple went through the crowd. Guests looked at him, waiting for a reaction, but he stayed rooted, face stiff. His silence wasn't neutral. It was a verdict, and everyone saw it. My chest tightened. If my partner won't shield me, then I must shield myself. For me, for Zinnia. A neighbor leaned close as she placed her plate on the trash pile. Her words were soft but sharp. He should have said something. I forced a nod, pressing my lips together. If I opened my mouth right then, I wasn't sure whether a laugh or a scream would come out. This wasn't the first time he'd stood still while I took the blows. Thanksgiving when Astria belittled my cooking, Christmas when she mocked the way I decorated the tree. He'd always chosen silence. Each time I told myself it was to keep peace. Each time it left me more alone. I set my glass down carefully on the table, but my hand trembled. My restraint was wearing thin, my voice pressing at the back of my throat like steam in a kettle. I fought it back, not because I was afraid, but because I knew blurting now would only feed her performance. This silence is no longer golden, I thought. It's a chain I'm ready to break. I turned my eyes to Zinnia. She was chasing a balloon across the grass, hair flying, her laughter unbroken. That sight anchored me. Everything I swallowed today, I swallowed for her. Every word I held back was so she wouldn't see me broken. But the guests' silence was deafening. They continued eating, chatting in lowered voices as though nothing had happened. Invisibility wrapped around me like a cloak. Anger sharpened inside. My pulse pounded in my ears. They see me, they see her, and they do nothing. I lifted my glass again, gripping the rim so tight I thought it might crack. A storm was building in me. There are storms that announce themselves with thunder. Mine announced itself with silence. I glanced across the yard. Astria caught my eye and smirked, as if she'd already won, as if her words were carved into stone. But she didn't know that every quiet second was me pulling back the bowstring, waiting for the right shot. Zinnia rolled her bike closer to where her cousins sat near the cake table, her face glowing with pride as she rang the little silver bell I had attached that morning. She leaned over the handlebars, explaining to her cousin how the ribbons caught the sunlight. The children gathered, eyes wide, admiring her excitement. Across the yard, Astria's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed thin, a mixture of contempt and envy simmering beneath her pearls. She leaned toward a neighbor, her voice low but not low enough. "She's spoiled already. No child needs that," she murmured, chin tilted in Zinnia's direction. I caught the words, and my chest tightened. I steadied my hands around the glass I held, refusing to let them shake. She doesn't see a child's joy. She only sees a weapon to use against me. The neighbor she spoke to gave a nervous smile, nodding faintly. Guests nearby shifted uneasily, pretending not to hear. Nobody stepped in. Nobody told her it was cruel. Instead, they avoided my eyes, retreating into their drinks or their conversations. The silence was thick enough to taste. I turned toward Zinnia, forcing warmth into my smile. "Sweetheart, don't forget to show them how the bell works again," I called, keeping my voice calm, steady, as though nothing venomous had been said. She grinned and rang it proudly, laughter spilling out of her like sunlight. I refused to let her see the sting in my chest. But Astria wasn't finished. She never was. As the children returned to their slices of cake, Astria straightened, smoothing her jacket. Her eyes found mine for a fleeting second before she turned back to the crowd. "See?" she said loudly enough for all the tables to hear. "She has nothing to say," Guilty, as always. Conversations faltered, heads turned. A few guests exchanged awkward glances, whispers surfacing at the edges. I felt every eye on me. My stomach clenched, but something inside me lifted its head. I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. Guilty of what, exactly? I asked, holding her gaze. Of giving my daughter a bike? Of celebrating her childhood? The words landed sharp, and the yard grew quieter. Astria scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. You always twist things, Seline. You never understand family values. The irony struck hard. Family values, she said, while humiliating her own granddaughter in public. I felt the shift in me, bitterness melting into courage. Funny, I replied softly but clearly. I thought family values were about protecting children, not tearing them down. Gasps threaded through the crowd. Some guests looked between us, their faces registering shock, others nodding slightly, though they tried to hide it. Astria's smirk faltered for a heartbeat. Then she laughed bitterly, turning to the nearest aunt. You hear this? She thinks she sets the rules here. I took a step closer, my voice steady, no longer carrying hesitation. Respect isn't given to those who trample others, it's earned. And this is my child's birthday. If you can't honor that, you should step back. The murmur of voices grew louder, the tide beginning to turn. One guest whispered audibly, "She's right." Another nodded slowly, glancing away when Astria's sharp eyes cut toward them. Step back? Astria repeated, her laugh brittle. You think you can draw lines with me? You don't mean that. I met her gaze without flinching. Inside, my thoughts burned like iron. I don't just think, I know. Because silence hasn't protected me, but my words can protect her. She raised her chin, smirk returning but thinner this time, hiding anger that flickered underneath. We'll see how long that lasts, she muttered. The crowd buzzed with nervous energy, uncertain whether to applaud my words or retreat into the safety of silence. Yet I saw it. Subtle nods, eyes avoiding hers and flicking toward me with something like quiet support. I had given my first warning. Astria's eyes hardened, her smirk more mask than victory. I felt it, the shift in the air, like the pause before a storm breaks. And as Zinnia laughed, pedaling her bike in circles across the yard, I caught Astria's gaze sharpen, not at me this time, but at the bike itself. The party limped forward after my warning, though no one was fooled. Guests tried to patch together conversations, laughing louder than they needed to, as if volume could cover the unease. Children tugged at balloons, clapping their hands, but even their play felt subdued. I passed another slice of cake to a little boy and looked over at Astria. She stood near the cake table, pacing slowly, her face a mask. Her hands moved with precision as she straightened a napkin here, adjusted a fork there, all while her eyes never left the bike, leaning proudly near the fence. I whispered to myself, it's not her silence that scares me, it's her calm. She wasn't loud now. She wasn't smirking or cutting me with words. She was quiet, and in that quiet, I sensed something worse than humiliation. I'd learned long ago that her stillness wasn't peace. It was a storm waiting to split open. A neighbor tried to lighten the air. So, Seline, he asked too cheerily, how's work these days? Busy season? Yes, I answered, but my voice was flat. He chuckled nervously, glancing at Astria, then looked away. Around the yard, I saw others laughing at small things that weren't funny. They were buying time, waiting for the next blow, as though they knew it was coming too. Then it happened. Astria walked briskly into my kitchen. For a second, I thought she'd decided to help herself to another drink, but when she returned, the gleam of metal in her hand caught the sun. A knife, one of mine. My body locked. She won't, I thought desperately. She wouldn't, but she did. She strode past the guests, past the tables, straight to the bike. Without a moment's hesitation, she plunged the knife into the front tire. A violent hiss erupted as the air escaped, loud enough to cut the chatter short. No, I whispered, but the word barely left my lips. She slashed again. The second tire collapsed, rubber squealing against metal. The ribbons Zinnia had tied to the handles fluttered to the ground, lifeless. Gasps rose. Someone near me whispered, "Is she out of her mind?" Children screamed, clutching each other. One little girl buried her face into her mother's dress. Guests froze where they stood, shock gluing their feet to the grass. Astria straightened, knife still in hand, her smile deliberate. She turned toward Zinnia and declared, "Now she knows life isn't all fun and games. Better to learn young." My ears rang. I couldn't move. My body was rigid, my mind buzzing like every alarm in the world had gone off at once. I watched the shredded rubber sag on the bike frame, my daughter's treasure reduced to ruin in seconds. Beside me, I heard muffled cries. Zinnia's small gasp ripped through me. Her hands flew up to cover her mouth, eyes wide, frozen in terror. She whispered, her voice trembling, "Mom, did I do something wrong?" I fell to my knees and gathered her against me, her body quivering like a bird's in my arms. Tears didn't come yet. She was shaking, holding it all inside, and that hurt worse than screams. I stroked her hair, whispering into the crown of her head, "No, baby, you did nothing wrong. Nothing." But Astria wasn't finished. She glared at Zinnia as though she were disciplining her own child. "A spoiled child needs correction," she said coldly. "Enough," I hissed under my breath, but my voice didn't carry. No one moved. No one stopped her. Guests looked anywhere but at me, fixing napkins, gathering their things, clutching their children closer. Some slipped toward the gate quietly, unwilling to stay another second. Others whispered to each other in harsh tones, but not one stepped forward. One man muttered, "Someone should stop her," but his feet stayed planted. I held Zinnia tighter, rocking her slowly, whispering, "You're safe, you're safe." Inside, though, I knew safety was a lie. Her cruelty wasn't about teaching lessons. It was about breaking joy and proving she still had power. She had wielded her knife not against rubber and streamers, but against me, against the little flame of joy my daughter had kindled. I looked at the ruined bike, the knife dangling casually from her fingers, and something inside me shifted. I didn't scream, I didn't move, but inside me, something finally broke free. And it wasn't fear anymore. The bike lay crumpled against the fence, rubber torn, ribbons scattered like fallen feathers. The yard was frozen, every guest holding their breath. And then Astria turned her gaze, sharp and unblinking, straight at my daughter. "Life is bitter," she said, her voice cold enough to still the summer air. "Better she tastes it now." Gasps broke from the crowd, followed by horrified whispers. A woman near the lemonade table muttered, "Did she just say that to a child?" Another man shook his head in disbelief. I felt the words drive into me, not just for Zinnia, but for myself. It wasn't only the bike she had crushed, it was innocence, mine once, and now my daughter's. "Mom," Zinnia whimpered, pressing into my side. Her small body trembled against me. I tightened my hold, but my fists curled behind her back. Astria wasn't finished. She lifted her chin as if she were delivering a lecture. "Children need lessons. This world doesn't hand out joy for free. The sooner she learns that, the stronger she'll be." Strong. My daughter's wide eyes weren't strength. They were fear, shame forced on her by a grandmother who dressed cruelty in the language of wisdom. My teeth clenched. My nails dug into my palm, but I stayed rooted because I knew an explosion now would only crown Astria's performance. Still, rage simmered in my chest, filling every corner of me. I thought of all the times elders and families wrapped their unkindness as teaching. "It's for your own good," they'd say, as if that made the wound noble. Not this time. I stepped forward, my voice steady, but low. "You don't get to teach my daughter bitterness. That is not your right." For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. My words cut through, clean and sharp. But Astria smirked, and in a gesture that felt rehearsed, she raised her hand and cut me off. "Don't embarrass yourself more, Seline," she snapped. "Everyone knows you twist things." A few gasps rippled again, and then whispers rose, murmurs spreading like wildfire. "She silenced her." "She always does." I swallowed hard. She's not just silencing me. She's silencing every woman who's ever been told she's too loud, too wrong, too much. A relative near the cake muttered nervously, "Let's just keep the peace." Those words stung almost as much as hers. Keep the peace. For whom? For the one destroying a child's birthday in front of everyone. My chest burned. My pulse raced. Helplessness battled with indignation. I opened my mouth again, but the crowd's silence felt suffocating, pressing down on me. Crowds don't need to boo you. Their silence is enough to tell you you're alone. Zinnia's hand gripped mine, her fingers digging in. She clung tighter, trembling but silent. Her silence hurt more than anything Astria had said. I turned toward Thayer, who still stood by the grill, arms crossed, his face stiff. His eyes didn't meet mine. That betrayal was sharper than any knife. I looked back at the guests. Some were watching, but none spoke. They shifted, they whispered, but not one person stood beside me. Not one. I breathed slowly, trying to keep my shoulders from shaking. This is no longer about holding peace, I thought. It's about holding truth. Astria laughed then, short and cutting, as if she had already secured victory. She looked around, smug, convinced the yard was her court, her silence now my defeat. But she didn't know. She thought she'd silenced me. She didn't know she'd only sharpened my voice. Astria stood tall in the middle of my yard, her voice still echoing from the cruel lesson she had delivered to my daughter. The bike lay ruined, its deflated tires sagging into the grass, ribbons torn, the bell silent. The guests remained unsettled, shifting on their feet, whispering in corners, their discomfort buzzing like gnats in the heavy late-afternoon air. Then, as if the humiliation of slashed tires and sharp words hadn't been enough, Astria reached for the bottle of wine sitting on the table. She filled 2 glasses deliberately, one for herself, one she shoved into my hand. "Let's toast to real lessons in life," she declared, raising her glass high. Gasps slipped from the crowd. Someone muttered, "This is too much." She turned, smirk widening, and taunted, "Drink, Seline. Show your daughter what strength looks like." I stared at the deep red liquid in the glass, the sunlight catching on its surface. It wasn't wine she handed me. It was humiliation in a glass. I lifted it slowly, eyes locked with hers, refusing to blink, refusing to let her see hesitation. Around us, whispers broke out. "Is she really going to?" "This is insane." Astria's eyes glittered with triumph. "Go on," she pressed. I brought the glass to my lips and sipped slowly. The bitter taste coated my tongue, and my stomach churned. But I swallowed, keeping my gaze steady on hers. The guests shifted uneasily, some turning away, others staring in disbelief. The air thickened with tension, as though everyone was waiting for something to crack. And then silence fell. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I froze. The stillness was louder than words. It stretched, long and taut, pulling at the edges of every heart in that yard. "She has no comeback," a cousin whispered to another. Astria's lips curved into a triumphant smile. To her, my silence was surrender. She basked in it, turning her face so the crowd could see. "See? Even now, she has nothing." She knows I'm right. I breathed evenly, forcing calm into every muscle. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is say nothing. Inside, though, my thoughts stormed. My stillness wasn't defeat, it was strategy. I gripped the glass tighter, waiting. And then, a shift I hadn't expected. A small hand slid into mine, warm, trembling, but steadying me. Zinnia pressed close, whispering softly, "It's okay, Mom." Her words cracked something in me, not in weakness, but in resolve. Her hand was the rope pulling me out of the pit Astria had dug. My silence wasn't surrender. It was the bowstring pulled back, ready to strike. I looked down at her. She gazed up at me, eyes wide and innocent, but behind them I saw something else. Faith. She believed in me, even when the others didn't. Guests noticed the gesture, their murmurs rippling, but they didn't understand its weight. To them, it was a child clinging to her mother. To me, It was my anchor. Across the yard, Astria smiled smugly, savoring what she thought was victory. She had no idea the tide had just shifted. I straightened, glass still in my hand. The silence I carried was no longer a chain. It was a weapon, sharp and ready. Astria tilted her head, mistaking my composure for defeat. She didn't see the storm building behind my eyes. She thought she'd silenced me, I told myself. She had no idea my silence was the warning shot. I inhaled deeply, my pulse steady now, my voice forming words that would cut deeper than her knife ever could. And when I finally opened my mouth, I knew every word would land like steel. The glass still sat heavy in my hand, the bitter taste lingering on my tongue. The yard was suffocating in silence, guests shifting uncomfortably, children held tighter by parents who didn't know whether to leave or stay. Astria's smirk widened, convinced my quiet was surrender. I placed the glass down slowly on the table, straightened my back, and fixed my eyes on her. When I spoke, my voice didn't tremble, it cut. That bike wasn't even meant for my daughter. The yard froze. Conversations halted mid-breath, guests blinking, glancing at one another, confused. Astria's smile faltered for the first time. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her tone sharper now, uncertain. I stepped forward, steady, deliberate. "It was meant for your granddaughter, Brooklyn. And I fought the manufacturer for it when her old one broke. This wasn't about spoiling my child. It was about protecting yours." A murmur spread through the crowd like a wave. Faces turned, shock rippling across them. My heart pounded, but my words were firm. For once, I wasn't defending, I wasn't explaining, I was revealing. "For months," I continued, "Brooklyn begged for a new bike, and when hers failed, when it broke beneath her, I went to bat. I wrote the emails, I made the calls, I pushed until the company admitted it was their defect, and they replaced it with the exact model she wanted." Aunt Lydia's eyes widened. She whispered to the woman beside her, "Then why? Why is Zinnia the one riding it?" I didn't break my gaze from Astria. "Because when it arrived, I kept it safe. I wanted to surprise Brooklyn today. But you," I gestured at the shredded tires on the grass, "you destroyed it before she ever had the chance." Gasps broke the air. Someone whispered, "Dear God." Inside me, something sharpened. For once, my words didn't tremble. They cut. Astria threw her head back and laughed, brittle and too loud. "Lies. Always lies with you, Seline." Some nodded uncertainly, but others frowned. Confusion warred with suspicion. "Why?" Aunt Lydia asked aloud this time. "Would she say this in front of all of us if it weren't true?" Astria turned, voice rising. "Because she's dramatic, always twisting facts. Don't believe her. She loves to play the victim." I stayed silent, letting her dig deeper. Her own desperation was unmasking her better than I ever could. "She's manipulative," Astria pressed on, eyes darting from face to face. "She wants to make me look bad, and you're all falling for it." But the murmurs weren't supporting her anymore. They were questioning. Doubt hung heavy. I took a breath, then moved to the patio table where I had set up the projector for birthday photos. My hands didn't shake as I pulled the small USB from my pocket and slid it into the slot. The screen flickered, and then the video played. The yard was suddenly filled with the sound of hissing air, the crack of rubber under steel, the gasps of children. The recording was clear. Astria walking out of my kitchen, knife in hand, driving it into the bike's tires. Zinnia's little voice cried out, her hands flying to her mouth. And there was me, frozen, pulling my daughter close. Gasps erupted anew. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "She really did it." The recording ended in silence so heavy it felt like the air itself had thickened. I turned back to the crowd. My voice was calm, measured. For the record, this wasn't about teaching lessons. This was about control. And now everyone has seen it. Astria's face drained of color. Her lips moved, sputtering, but no words came. She looked around wildly, searching for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. None did. Thayer finally lifted his eyes from the ground, staring at his mother. The conflict on his face was stark, But this time, disbelief outweighed loyalty. And he said nothing, but silence had never carried so much weight. Guests started speaking over one another. She ruined a child's gift. In front of everyone. What kind of person does that? Astria raised her voice, but her words drowned beneath theirs. And for the first time, I wasn't the one on trial. She was. As the whispers grew louder, circling her like vultures, I realized this battle wasn't over, but the war had just turned in my favor. The video ended, and for a long breath, no one moved. The only sound was the faint clinking of glasses as a breeze stirred through the yard. Then whispers started, low at first, then rising like the tide. Heads turned toward Astria. Some eyes narrowed with judgment, others darted to me, then back to the ruined bike lying on the grass. A few women went to Zinnia, gently patting her shoulders, murmuring comfort. Astria lifted her chin and spread her hands as though the crowd simply misunderstood. "This is being taken out of context," she declared, her voice tight but still aiming for control. "I was teaching responsibility. Children don't grow from coddling." But her words fell heavy, like stones dropped into a pond. No ripples followed. No one nodded. No one backed her. Inside, I thought, she can talk until she loses her voice. The truth is already louder. Thayer stared at her from the grill, shoulders tense, lips pressed together. He didn't come to her rescue this time. His silence was no longer protection. It was condemnation. "She stabbed a child's bike," a guest muttered harshly. "Who does that? At her own granddaughter's party," another replied. The murmurs spread, fragmented, chaotic. My mother-in-law's authority cracked like glass. I stepped forward, my voice calm, clear. "This is my house. This is my child's birthday. And you are no longer welcome here." The crowd hushed instantly, waiting. Astria scoffed, her laugh brittle. "You don't mean that." But I met her eyes steadily. I had meant it my entire life. I just never said it. She turned desperately toward Thayer. "Son, tell her this is ridiculous. Tell her she's going too far." He said nothing. His jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the ruined bike. "Leave," I repeated, firmer. "Now." The tension thickened, a sharp silence. Guests glanced between us, breath held, waiting for the break. Astria's cheeks flushed deep red. She hissed, "You'll regret humiliating me like this." I shook my head slowly. "No, you'll regret humiliating a child in front of witnesses." A cousin near the gate muttered, "She's done for. The whole church will hear of this by morning." Phones appeared in hands, screens lighting as whispers grew louder. A few began recording openly. Astria noticed, her face blanching under the weight of the attention. She spun toward the gate, her heels sinking into the grass as she stormed forward. But she couldn't escape the murmurs trailing behind her. Sharp words like knives she couldn't control. Unbelievable. Poor Zinnia. She'll never live this down. At the gate, she turned back once, eyes burning. "This isn't over," she spat. Before she could slam it shut, a voice rose from the crowd. It was Malis, my neighbor, who had stood quiet all evening. She stepped forward now, her voice steady. "If that were my kid," she said firmly, "I'd never forgive." "And I hope you don't, Seline." Nods followed. A few claps broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger. The sound wasn't celebration, it was acknowledgement, support. I felt Zinnia press into my side, her small body steadying against me. For years I thought silence meant no one cared, I told myself. Tonight, I learned silence sometimes waits for the truth to speak first. And as Astria slammed the gate behind her, I knew this wasn't the end of her war, it was only the beginning of her defeat. The house fell quiet once the last guest had left. The yard still smelled faintly of wine and shredded rubber, as though the air itself clung to the memory of what had happened. I moved slowly through the kitchen, stacking empty plates, brushing crumbs into my hand. Each scrape of porcelain against porcelain seemed too loud against the silence that had settled. Zinnia had curled up on the couch, her small body finally giving in to exhaustion. Her hair stuck to her damp cheeks, the faint streaks of tears dried against her skin. I pulled a blanket over her, pressing my lips gently to her forehead. I wanted her dreams to be filled with balloons and laughter, I whispered to myself, not knives and bitter lessons. The living room felt surreal. as though the chaos outside had happened in another world. Yet here was the proof. My daughter's sleeping form, her bike wrecked in the garage, and the hollow ache in my chest. When I turned, Thayer was standing by the doorway, his arms folded tightly, his eyes shadowed. For a long time he said nothing, and then finally he broke the silence. "You didn't have to humiliate her like that." The words snapped through me. I spun, incredulous. "I humiliated her! She humiliated your daughter!" His jaw tightened. "She's my mother, Seline. You don't understand what that means." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, I understand perfectly. It means her reputation matters more to you than your child's joy." He stepped forward, voice rising. "That's not fair." "What's not fair," I shot back, "is you standing by while she slashed our daughter's bike apart in front of half the town. What's not fair is me standing alone every time she decides to rewrite reality." He rubbed his forehead, pacing. "You didn't have to show that video. You could have handled it privately." I stared at him, stunned. "Privately? Do you hear yourself? She destroyed a child's gift and shamed her in front of everyone, and you think I should have protected her?" His silence earlier had been betrayal. His words now felt like salt rubbed into wounds. I lowered my voice, cold and clear. "If you can't stand beside me when she tears us apart, then maybe you don't stand beside me at all." He froze, eyes widening, but he didn't argue. He knew I meant it. Later, after he had retreated upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. Years of paying her bills flashed before me. Electricity, credit cards, groceries she could have managed but chose not to because I always gave in. I opened account after account and began removing my name, canceling auto payments tied to my cards. For years I thought I was buying peace, I told myself, but peace never came. It doesn't come from feeding the fire. With every click, with every deletion, I felt lighter. This wasn't revenge. This was survival. I closed the laptop and whispered into the stillness. My daughter will never learn silence from me. She'll learn strength. The night deepened. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and Zinnia's soft breathing. I made myself a cup of coffee and stepped into the garage. The wrecked bike leaned against the wall, ribbons limp, tires slashed open like wounds. I stared at it for a long time, mug warm in my hands. The wreckage lay like a corpse of childhood joy, I thought. But it wasn't just metal. It was proof that survival sometimes means letting go of blood ties. I set my coffee aside, pulled the garage door closed with finality, and stood in the darkened kitchen. And in that silence, I knew one thing with certainty. The family I was building didn't need her permission to exist. The morning after felt heavy before I even opened my eyes. My phone lit up on the nightstand, buzzing endlessly. Dozens of missed calls, messages flooding in, the family chat exploding with accusations, excuses, and desperate spin. Astria was trying to rewrite the story overnight, claiming I had provoked her, claiming the video was misleading. But the screenshots told the truth. Cousins forwarded me threads where others had already posted the video publicly. It had spread beyond our backyard, beyond whispers. It was out in the open. Her reputation, polished for decades, was crumbling in real time. I scrolled past texts defending her. She didn't mean it. She was teaching discipline. But right alongside them were comments cutting deep. Who slashes a child's bike? Unforgivable. For years she silenced me in living rooms, turned my protests into weakness. Now the truth screamed louder than she ever could. Across the kitchen, Thayer sat with his coffee, shoulders slumped, eyes locked on the floor. He didn't need to say a word. Shame rolled off him, thick and heavy. He was tethered to her disgrace, and he knew it. He didn't look at me, and I didn't offer him comfort. By Sunday morning, the reckoning was public. At church, she tried to defend herself, her voice strained. It was a misunderstanding. You all know me. I was only teaching a lesson. The congregation stared back, whispers rippling through the pews. Mothers shook their heads. Fathers pulled their children closer. A deacon leaned toward me quietly. You did right, he murmured. Protecting a child is never wrong. Astria faltered midway through the service. The weight of judgment pressed in from every direction. Her pearls seemed duller, her voice thinner. She stood, muttered something about not feeling well, and walked out before the sermon ended. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. Her throne wasn't taken by me, it was taken by her own cruelty. The story spread wider as the week unfolded. Neighbors whispered in grocery aisles, co-workers of Thayer's siblings shared the clip. Relatives who had always kept neutral now spoke openly. She had gone too far, and they wanted no part of her defense. By midweek, Astria wasn't the matriarch anymore. She was the cautionary tale. At home, the silence between Thayer and me stretched longer. One evening, he finally spoke, his voice low. "She's still my mother." I set down my pen after balancing the checkbook, meeting his eyes evenly. "And I'm still your wife, but if you can't protect your child from her, then I'll do it without you." He flinched. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant," I said firmly, "and it's why we're here." I opened the laptop, logging into accounts tied to her name. One by one, I cut the cords. No more auto payments, no more quiet deposits, no more bankrolling her choices under the guise of peacekeeping. "For years I paid her bills," I said aloud, not to him but to myself, thinking I was keeping peace. Peace never came, so I stopped paying for my own silence. Thayer stared, searching for words, but I had already finished the sentence in my head. "This is your choice. Stand with us or stay chained to her. But I'm done." The house was quiet after that. He didn't argue. He didn't promise. He simply sat there, face pale, as though realizing the line I had drawn wasn't temporary. It was permanent. That weekend, I took Zinnia shopping. Her eyes lit up the moment she spotted a new bike, gleaming red with a basket and shiny chrome handlebars. "Mom, can I try it?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. "Of course," I said, steadying it as she climbed on. She pedaled clumsily at first, then with growing confidence, laughter spilling into the air. Watching her circle the store, I felt a knot in me loosen. The bike wasn't just metal and rubber. It was proof that joy could be rebuilt. On the ride home, she leaned against me in the car. "Will Grandma ever come back?" she asked softly. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Not unless she learns kindness," I said, "and that's not our job to teach." Zinnia nodded, her small face thoughtful. Then she smiled. "I like this bike better anyway." That night, as we rode down our own sunlit street, her laughter ringing out as the wheels spun, I felt something new settle in me. Family isn't blood. Family is who protects your joy, not who destroys it. And as I watched her ride ahead, streamers flying in the wind, I realized her war was over. But my freedom had just begun.